Start recording again. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I realized I had not set a timer, and I want to keep these around 20 minutes so they can actually fit on YouTube. Okay, so I'm just going to record these initialization function names in my shortcut script. So I have, if it's this name, this concept, a function that does this, an initialization function that initializes global data. I want from now on, and I mean this might be a lofty kind of goal, but from now on until I die, right? So, right, that's a pretty bold statement, right? From now on until I die, like 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if I'm generous, right? 130, yeah, that's not going to happen. But let's say that from now on, if it's some type of function that initializes global data, this is what it's called. Or maybe we want to also allow a camel case version of the same thing, right? Because I am breaking my camel case for functions, and then a snake case for variable names. Because right now I'm using a constant case, which suggests it's a constant. And part of that is because it's a function that creates kind of like this constant container of data that should be considered immutable. I don't know. Or maybe I'm just making up excuses for myself every time I break patterns, and every time I'm being a hypocrite, I gotta like make up an excuse, because that's how people work. Because we have to shield our ego, because that's why people become self-deluded. Because, right, a lack of confidence is problematic, and so you gotta sometimes become self-deluded in order to protect your ego, to protect yourself. A lot of insanity is actually the result of people coming up with like grandiose stories about how they're important, because it's so vital that we have a sense of importance in our life. And if we can't get that, we will go insane. Like, there'll be nothing chemically or physically wrong with your body, but you will go insane if you can't find a sense of fulfillment. So, good to know. Good to know. Now that I've given you therapy, just send me the check in the mail. Okay, so what the fuck am I doing? So it's kind of like init global data, right? And then init global data, like that. And init global data. Just a whole bunch of like potential ways that I could type that. And then we also are going to take this, and if you type it exactly as it should be, we will have a little check mark pop up that will tell us, good job, you typed it correctly, you remember correctly, you're not going insane. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for the init global functions. And maybe init global init global functions, and then init global init global functions, right? And then we could say we could be a little bit more loose with this terminology and think about like global function initializer, global function init function name. And then, do we have like a... Yeah, we do. So we're going to take the initialize global functions function name, and we're going to put that there. And then we'll just paste that there. Then, once again, if you type it completely correctly... So, like how people have IntelliSense, I kind of have... You can kind of think of this as quote-unquote IntelliCheck. Like, I don't want I find most of the time when IntelliSense pops up, it's just really distracting and it breaks my concentration and my flow. And it also, right, it covers up parts of the screen that I don't want covered up. So usually, if I do use IntelliSense, I'm always using suggestion mode where it doesn't, where it just shows me suggestions while I'm typing, but doesn't mess with my flow as much because it doesn't like randomly paste things when I'm busy typing. But I'd rather much have it where nothing shows up at all, unless I'm specifically like uncertain about what I'm typing. Which means that I'm going to code a little bit slower, and there's more of a cognitive payload when I'm coding, but I'd rather be slow, deliberate, and have some quality in my code than grope my way around with IntelliSense. Yeah, shots fired, I know. I mean, look at me from my high horse. I mean, what have I accomplished with my life? I don't know, I've done a few cool things, but I'd say, nothing to brag too much about, so... so with that said, let's keep on going. Global class initializer. I want to call ini glow cloud like that. Ini glow cloud, and then ini, and then init global classes. Init global classes. And we could say init global class without plural, not plural, singular. Init global class. And then we'll just say ini glow and cla for class. And then if you type it completely correctly, we're going to have it just show up with a check mark to let us know. I cannot multitask at all, so I'm trying to like explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it, and it's not working. But I think this is good for me, because my first job as an intern, I worked as a technical artist at ArenaNet. I peaked as an intern, basically. But one of the complaints was, you know, every time they asked me what I was doing, I had literally no words for it. Because, like, when I'm writing code, I literally, I couldn't, you get in that zone and you can't vocalize what you're doing. Which makes sense, because see how inefficient I am when I'm blabbing my mouth all the fucking time. But it's good to be able to, you know, and so you're coding, you're in the zone, and then your boss is like, hey, what are you doing? And it's like, man, I was coding, I was in this completely non-verbal mode, and now I need to, like, give, like, a little summary speech about what the hell I'm doing on the spot. Or it might just be like a engineer thing where when someone asks me what I'm doing, I think too much about the details and then I can't come up with the words, when you could just be like, man, I'm fixing that thing from, you know, yesterday, you know? Like, maybe you could have just said something that simple and it would have been good enough. I don't know. Whatever. They also said I was more of a mad scientist, and what was it? When I met you, I got the idea you were a mad scientist type, but now I think you're a little bit too mad and not enough scientist. That's what they literally said to me when I got fired. I still think that's kind of hilarious. I'm like, I don't have any dash line I1. I don't have any hard feelings about that. Well, anymore. I1 x64. Because I think they were dead on right with that. Because I am kind of a mad scientist, and maybe I am a little bit too crazy. And the one thing I did take offense to was like, oh, you don't seem to be working on anything outside of work. And that was a complete lie. I was always working on things outside of work. I was just never showing it off. You know, it takes time to show stuff off and brag, right? Like, recording this video is slowing me down tremendously because now I'm like blabbing my mouth off, showing you, oh look, I can code shit, and now I'm taking time that could be spent just concentrating on the code. All right, anyways, ranting enough. So we got the global data, the global functions, the global classes, and we need one more thing, which is earlier I was referring to the global classes as global objects, but I decided that that was a horrible way to go because object is such a generic term. It's like, well, what the fuck do you mean by that? So we're gonna address that by having So if we do type something like this, where we're expecting an init global objects function, we're just gonna say, I don't know, don't use ini glow obj, use ini glow CLA. And the thing is okay, sure, like maybe you're working in a language that doesn't technically have classes, so maybe it's more proper to be more generic and call it objects. But we want to think about what gives us the best communication. And even though global classes might not be as accurate as ini global objects, the fact is this may be less accurate, but it is more descriptive and gives us more insight into the intent than global object, right? So, you know, if you've ever taken like a science class where your teacher fucking lies to your face because you don't have enough background knowledge to understand something, so they lie to you intentionally because you don't have enough background knowledge for them to be completely honest. Right, so that's kind of what this initial global classes object is, you know, because maybe it's because by class we just mean something that has data mixed with functions, right? So this is kind of a lie, but it's the most helpful. This is a more helpful lie than this vague truth, right? So going back to the science class analogy, you know, right, the whole like valence thing with like valence electrons and the different orbitals, right? Well, that in a way is a lie, right? Because electrons don't actually have like orbitals like that. They have like electron clouds, and everything is a probability, and it's a probability cloud. And that's why you sometimes have these exceptions to like the rules of how different chemicals chemically react. You're like, but all the math says it shouldn't chemically react this way, but it does. And that's because, you know, the model of having these little orbitals is a rough model that usually works, and it's simplified. It helps you kind of grasp your head around it, especially for me, since I like geometry more than I like calculus. I'm definitely going to be more receptive to a planetary model of a atom than a electron cloud probability thing that is like, it's a much better description, but it's also more amorphous and hard to work with. So right here's our electron cloud, and here's our orbitals, right? So two different models for the same concept, and they both have reasons why you would use one or the other, but I'm going to stick with this simple idea. And I feel like I may have mixed around the word molecule and atom while I was ranting, and now I feel stupid. But to my defense, it's been a long time since I've had chemistry class. Okay, so we have that, and I think that's good enough. Actually, we could have something like this: init global objects, init global object, init global object, init global objects. And then we could say like global object initializer function, and then like global object init function, right? And then we'll say, and we'll do the same thing. We'll just copy and paste this message. And we could timestamp this. See. So it's 2020-05-13, and this is dash A, right? What the fuck does A mean? Dash A, but I'm just going to take this. I'm going to put it over here just to make these messages unique. So this is same date. One is A, one is B. Okay, so now that we've kind of like, we've kind of canonicalized that, but I also know that another thing we need to do is init global data, because I know that I called it that before. And let's make really quick. Okay, yeah, and then, right, this was init global functions. Right, when we were being completely long-handed, that's what we were calling them, but I'm OCD and like things to line up, so I'm scrapping that. And then init global classes, which we never actually had, because by the time we started calling it this, we were already going shorthand. And then init, and then down here, init global objects. So now we have, the idea is, right, we have all these different ways that we could, like, identify the function, and we want to, like, funnel that all down to reduce the search space to just this, right? We want to take, so we're taking I don't like everything I read in clean code, which I guess if you're a thinking individual, right, you're going to agree and disagree with things that you read. But one of the things I really thought strongly agreed with was the idea of, like, one word per concept. And they kind of meant, like, okay, if I'm going to use, right now I use in my code, I use get and put. So the word set should never, ever occur in my code base, because we want to have that consistency where we use the words get and put for the getters and setters, but I'm going to call them getters and putters. And that way you don't have to guess, like, oh, was this function called set texture, or was it called put texture, right? Like, you don't want to have to think about that. You just want to have that consistency in your code where you know that for the concept of putting something somewhere, you always use the word put, so you don't have to guess if it's called put or place or set or, whatever, right? So I'm kind of taking that concept to the extreme and saying, I'm going to take that concept one further and say, one, not just one name per concept, but one variable name per more specific concept, right? And then one function name for a more specific concept in terms of, like, a function that does something, right? So I'm just, like, extrapolating that Uncle Bob concept of, like, one word per concept, and I'm going completely overkill, batshit insane on it. Okay, so now that we've kind of, like, taken some time to organize our thoughts, what I'm going to do is, I'm almost out of time for this 20-minute segment. I'm going to refresh my shortcut script and take some time to reorganize that, because that's going to take some time. It takes some time for the shortcuts to reload, and then after that I'll be back. So I'm going to end the stream and end the recording and make sure that everything is organized here, and then start coding again.